Meantime, just days after the FDA approved emergency use of Gilead's remdesivir to treat COVID-19, the company says it's donating its entire supply to the government. I want to get over to Meg Terrell, who joins us now with more on that story. Meg.
Well, good morning, Andrew. And they say that the distribution of that drug will begin as soon as this week. We also learned, though, that in the FDA's letter to Gilead granting that emergency use authorization for remdesivir, the government said it would control the distribution of the drug. And this is surprising a lot of people in the biotechnology world. Leerink's Jeff Porges, an analyst who's covered the industry for a long time, saying, quote, the aggressive stance taken by the federal government in terms of controlling the supply and distribution of this medicine is unprecedented in our history of the industry. Citing Tamiflu, HIV, vaccine shortages, never, he said, have they seen this kind of control by the government before. And at issue is, of course, the supply of the drug. It's a very complex drug to manufacture, and there is limited supply right now. Gilead says it has about 1.5 million vials currently, which is about 140,000 treatment courses at the longer 10-day length of dosing, or about 250,000 for a 5-day course. And this is how they see ramping that up throughout this year. But for right now, supply is constrained, and that's going to become a question for what happens to other countries as they start to approve this drug as well. It's already under review in Europe, and according to a report in the Nikkei, the drug might be approved in Japan as soon as this week. And so there are questions about whether the drug will be available outside the U.S. as the U.S. controls the supply. I talked with Mike Osterholm at the University of Minnesota about this over the weekend, and he pointed out it could be a problem if down the line vaccines and drugs that the U.S. needs are developed elsewhere. He said, however we handle our own drugs and vaccines will in part determine how the rest of the world supports us with whatever drugs or vaccines they develop. And guys, analysts are modeling this to show that with the initial supply, only U.S. patients will be able to be covered. So it's one of the beginnings of the geopolitical arguments around access to these drugs. Guys?
Hey, Meg, I have two questions. One geopolitical, but one very domestic, which is to say that if we have, I think right now on average, about 2,000 deaths a day still, and Scott Gottlieb talked about this yesterday on Face the Nation, how much, and we're going to have him later on our broadcast to talk more about this, but how much does putting remdesivir in the hands of these hospitals, how much do you think that's going to change that number in terms of turning that dial?
We have to hope that it will. And in the results we saw from the NIH study, there was a trend toward a mortality benefit, but it wasn't statistically significant yet. And so what they saw is that in that trial of 1,000 patients, those getting remdesivir, 8% passed away versus 11% on placebo. But again, it didn't hit that statistical significance cutoff. So we're going to have to see if we can determine from these data whether it does have an impact on mortality.
Right. And then my geopolitical question was, it was always my understanding that there were certain drugs, and I don't know if it's true of remdesivir, but in terms of vaccines and others, when we do need to manufacture this and manufacture at scale and capacity, we can't just do it in the United States. We're going to need to use the facilities of places like India and elsewhere. And so how does this decision change, you think, that dynamic, even just the ability to manufacture some of these drugs? And are there other drugs out there that we're going to want that are in development right now that could be at risk or jeopardy in terms of at risk to our ability to get access to them in the future?
Well, it's a key question and something we're already seeing play out because so much of the raw materials that go into our medicines come from China and India. And I believe that the supply chain for remdesivir is pretty complex and probably goes through several countries already. So it is not encapsulated in the United States. And so it's going through multiple countries already to get finished. And while it may be finished here right now, at some point down the line, it probably will be finished in multiple places around the world. And that's when we'll have more supply. But right now, the supply is constrained. And so all of these questions you're asking are very important, not just for this drug, but for others that depend on the rest of the world for the supply chain as well.